I have to comment on the black belt. It's true. I have a black belt in Taekwondo, which is Korean karate, but I achieved the black belt on the basis of the written examination. You have the handout? This is called a handout. You haven't seen very many of these recently. I still use them. I'm old-fashioned. I want to direct your attention to page 1 on the bottom. Oh gosh, they gave me 30 minutes, but I'm going to take 31. Try to stop me, okay? On the bottom are my advertisements. Twitter. How many of you are on Twitter? Please follow me on Twitter. Please, please, please. I'm trying to catch up to Lady Gaga and Justin Bieber. Lady Gaga and Justin Bieber are in a race to be #1 in the world. Lady Gaga is up to 21 million. Justin Bieber, 22 million. I'm catching up. In another 2,840 years, I'll catch up, so please help me. I'm also on Facebook. Facebook and Twitter are very interesting. I use them to share information, new data, etc. And I also have a blog. It's Krashen Blogspot, and I use it for my letters to the editor. I'm interested in world records. I'm trying to break the world record, the Guinness Book of World Record for letters to the editor. I've already broken the record for letters submitted, but I haven't broken the record for letters published. It's this guy in Mumbai who's published 3,482 letters. I don't keep track, but I'm trying to catch up. And they're all about literacy, and they're all about reading. My last 3 letters, I had one in the Taipei Times. I know you read the Taipei Times regularly, right? And the Taiwanese are very upset about their international test scores. And I told them it's not so bad if you look at the data, and if you want to get better, try reading. It really works. And I wrote a version of the same letter to another newspaper that you read all the time, the South China Morning Post, which is Hong Kong, because they're complaining about the same problem, all right? Also, the other thing here is a website, sdkrashen.com is where I put my articles, the research. All for free, of course, and if I write another book, I probably will, all the chapters will be there for free on the website, okay? May I have a round of applause, please? Okay. I started doing that when I wrote a paper for an edited collection on input, and the book came out, and it sold for $160 American. I won't mention any names of publishers. Multilingual Matters. They also did a book called Poverty and Education. It was also $160. The irony was lost on them, okay? So it's very hard to find these things, so we've got to use the internet, I think, more vigorously. Okay, I'm going to talk today about the power of reading and, of course, new evidence for an old hypothesis. And the old hypothesis is something I'm sure everyone in this room knows. Pleasure reading is good for you. Pleasure reading is the source of our reading ability, our ability to write with a respectable writing style, our ability to handle complex grammatical constructions, our vocabulary knowledge, our spelling ability, and much of what we know about the world comes from reading. I think that reading is the most powerful tool we have in all of language education. For me, pleasure reading, and that means self-selected reading, will not alone bring you to the highest levels of literacy. It's the bridge between conversational language and academic language. Without it, you can't make it. I'm going to give you some evidence. I'll bore you with some statistical evidence, and for those of you who are still awake, I'll give some case histories and some, I think, amazing evidence about the power of libraries, which are far more important than we ever thought. Well, on your sheet, you'll see the evidence. I'm going to begin with a study that we must mention. It's not a new study, it's an old study, but we have to honor the lineage. And this stimulated interest in reading in North America. It's from a book published in 1965 called Hooked on Books. How many of you have heard of this? Hooked on Books. You can find used, oh great, you can find used copies on the internet. It was nearly a bestseller in the United States, a man named Daniel Fader. They looked at juvenile delinquents, reform schoolboys aged 12 to 17, tough kids. They surrounded them with good books, and they gave each boy a paperback book. This is yours. If you want a new one, return it to the library, you get a new one. No library cards, no penalty if you return it late anytime, no book reports. The most popular author, this is the 1960s, was, of course, Fleming, James Bond, #1. They really knew what the boys liked. They tested them after 2 years. After 2 years, and they compared them to boys not in the program. After 2 years, the readers were better in everything. Better in reading comprehension, writing fluency, writing complexity, attitude towards school. The comparison groups stayed the same or went down. We've known this since 1965. Fader and his colleagues didn't rely only on test scores. They also looked at the boys' behavior. They found that some of the boys were carrying their books in their back pockets, and they averaged a book every other day for 2 years. You don't need prizes if you have good books. You don't need extrinsic motivators. They watched the boys at the school basketball games when they watched their team play against other teams. During timeouts, halftime, a lot of the boys were reading their books. We've known about this for a long time. Get the right books in the environment and they will read them, even these hardcore boys. Free voluntary readings programs work for everybody. They work for first language, they work for second language, they work for children, they work for adults, left-handed, right-handed, they work for absolutely everybody. I'll show you a little bit of the second language research. The next study on your sheet, this is a little small, isn't it? For those of you under 35 who can read this, the Fiji Island study is one of my absolute favorites. This was published in a journal called the Reading Research Quarterly. This is delicious. This is wonderful. If you know the reading journals, you know that the Reading Research Quarterly is the #1 snob journal in the world. Most of the articles in this journal are long, boring, and nearly completely incomprehensible. The only people who can read these journals are monks who have trained in meditation for 20 years. These are articles that are written to be published, not written to be read. This is where it appeared. Wonderful. Warwick Ellie is one of our heroes and one of our best friends. He's a retired full professor from New Zealand, and he's popular on both sides. If you go to reading conferences and you ask people, who is Warwick Ellie? He's okay. Francis Mangubhai, his co-author, has nearly the same high status. I've met with both of these men. Francis Mangubhai spent a week with us at the University of Southern California. It was wonderful. This was done in the Fiji Islands, where English is taught as a foreign language beginning in kindergarten. Each child has 30 minutes a day of required English. Ellie and Mangubhai looked at the children in grades 4 and 5, and they were divided into 2 groups. One group got a program on your sheet. It says ALM, Audio Lingual Method. This is a combination, in my opinion, of everything that's wrong in language teaching combined into one method. It is the traditional method, boring and worldwide, that's what people use. The second method was SSR, Sustained Silent Reading. By the way, in the United States, we used to call that USSR. Uninterrupted, sustained silent reading. I think when Ronald Reagan became president, they stopped that. I think that was the idea. Anyway, so 30 minutes a day, the children are given books. Here are the books, boys and girls, enjoy. Now, they're already had English for 4 years, at least. So many of the books were comprehensible. The third program Ellie called shared reading, we know it as big books. The children are read to from big books so they can see the stories, they discuss the stories, and they do self-selected reading. What we have here on this chart are the gains in terms of months gained. We expect native speakers of English to gain 10 months in a year. Before we go through the data, let me review what we have here. We have Warwick Ellie, well-respected person. We have the Reading Research Quarterly, the most conservative professional journal in the field. This was not published in the Journal of the Communist Party, all right? We have standardized tests. This study should satisfy everybody, the harshest critic. How did it come out? Grade 4, look at this, audiolingual, 6.5 months gained. Sustained silent reading, make a big circle around this, 15 months gained. I didn't make this up, this is from the journal paper. Big books, 15 months gained. Fifth graders, audiolingual, a pathetic 2.5 months gained. Sustained silent reading, modest but impressive, respectable 9 months, big books 15. They were not only better in reading, they were better in writing, listening, and grammar. The children who did reading were better on grammar tests than children who studied grammar. The second year of the project, the 9 disappeared. The 2 groups, SSR and big books, were equivalent and farther ahead of the reading group. Ellie replicated this study in 1991 in Singapore in a journal called Language Learning, which is one of the top, most prestigious journals in the world in second language acquisition. Similar results with different groups of children, very well done. He also discussed some of the problems with the program, some of the complaints that the parents made and administrators. They said the children in the reading groups seem to be merely enjoying themselves. Well, we can't have that. It's sometimes very hard for people to accept this, that kids are having a good time and actually getting things done. Also, there was another concern, how will they do on the tests? They do great on the tests. They do better on the tests than children who do test preparation. The reason they do so well is because they can't help it. If you read a lot, the conventions of writing, the spelling, the grammar are subconsciously absorbed. You have no choice. When you write, every time you write something, people in this room, it's fine, it's excellent. There are very few, if any, mistakes. It's in the correct style, etc. You cannot write poorly. You don't even know how. The only way you can write poorly is if you're a teacher and you read lots of student papers. That's the only way. You go to someone's house, there are books all over the place. You would be amazed to see a sample of their writing with serious problems. It's very rare. The chart on the bottom I put together on the day I mastered Excel. Okay? I was very proud of myself. This is a paper I did published in a free journal, open access, ijflt.com, the International Journal of Foreign Language Teaching. This I thought would be a very good laboratory. I looked at English as a foreign language in countries outside English-speaking countries, where English is taught in high school and in college. So these are university, these are older students. One group gets the traditional program, the other group gets traditional, but some time is set aside for free voluntary reading, self-selected reading. The first column are the studies, and these are in a variety of countries, Taiwan, Japan, Korea, Singapore, all over the place. The last 2 columns are what count. These are 2 kinds of tests. A closed test is a test where you fill in blanks, missing words, and the RC is reading comprehension. Here's time for a little statistics today. Try to be calm. The numbers are called effect sizes. Here's how they work. If the effect size, if the number is positive, the readers did better. They're all positive, every single study. If the effect size is around 0.2, 0.3, that's a small effect. If it's 0.4, 0.5, 0.6, modest, 0.8, 0.9, that's pretty good. For both of you who remember your statistics class, effect size, the rest of you can relax, effect size of 1.0 means one group was about a standard deviation better than the other. The average effect size between 0.4 and 0.7, depending on how I calculated it. This stuff works. Let's now go to correlational studies. I have one big correlational study, brand new from England. This one from the UK. This was all over the web and the internet a few months ago. It's a wonderful study. I summarized it on my blog spot so you can look at it. What these beautiful researchers did, Sullivan and Brown, they have a big longitudinal study where they're following children over time through their entire lives. They tested them on vocabulary and spelling and other things at age 16. Here are the predictors. This is a chart. Try to remain calm. This is a multiple regression chart. This is a wonderful statistical tool. I wish it were taught in high school. These are the predictors. The beta, you see the column that says beta? Do you see that? Please say yes. Yes, okay. Yes, sir. This is the strength of each predictor holding the others constant, as if all these are independent. As you see from the top, socioeconomic, poverty, parent education, some kind of a, effect, not big, irregular. When you have access to books, these things count less, as we'll see. Look at this. Read to, this is vorlesen, read to every day at age 5. That's an effect, not a big one, but it's there. So you're right to emphasize read alouds. It does have an effect, no question. But wait, reads books often at age 10, more powerful, 0.313, do you see that? And now the big one, reads books more than once, twice a week at age 16, 0.353. That's the biggest predictor. What this means, yes, early start, fine. But you can also have late intervention, which can make up for what didn't happen when they were young. Yeah, it's good, again, read aloud, books around, etc. The big one, reading as a teenager. That's the biggest one. I want to show you one more to put in your short-term memory. Reading proficiency at age 5 had a weak effect. We're going to come back to that. You'll see what's going on. Case histories. I love case histories. Like we discussed this Moroccan boy, etc. And I know about the guy from Turkey who had a similar, went to jail and got interested in reading. My taxi driver told me about him. I gave him a big tip because I told him it was a consultant fee. And he started talking about this, not me. It was great. Here's some case histories. The trick with using case histories is to look at a lot of them. If you look at a lot of them, then you see consistencies. You can't just look at one or two. So I'm going to give you other ones that come to similar conclusions. The first one, as you see on your paper here, Geoffrey Canada. Geoffrey Canada is a star in the United States. He was in a movie called Waiting for Superman. He is the founder of the Harlem Children's Zone, of charter schools which have as their philosophy, get tough. Treat these children hard, make them work hard, give them lots of tests, have data. Not what I believe in. I read his autobiography. His autobiography is wonderful, in fact, even though I disagree with his philosophy. It's a very compelling book. It's about growing up in a life of high crime, in high poverty in New York. By the way, his book came out in 2 versions, in prose and also graphic novel. I, of course, read the graphic novel version. It was great. 2/3 through the book, he says this: I loved reading. And my mother, who read voraciously too, allowed me to have her novels after she finished them. My strong reading background allowed me to have an easier time of it in most of my classes. This is my leitmotif today. Reading makes up for the effect of poverty. We'll see this again and again. He had a friend who was a reader. They traded books. They both did well in school. Liz Murray was a similar case. She was the subject of a made-for-TV movie about 2 years ago. She wrote a book about it. Very interesting. She said she grew up in high poverty. She only went to elementary school 2 weeks before the final, just to find out what was going to be on the test. Her father had a very interesting habit. In those days, the New York public library system, the branch libraries were not connected by computer. Each one was independent. So her dad would go to a library, get a library card, take out as many books as he could and never return them. Then he'd go to another library, get a card. So the house was filled with fugitive library books. Here's what she says. Any formal education I received came from the few days I spent in attendance, mixed with knowledge I absorbed from random readings of my or Daddy's ever-growing supply of unreturned library books. As long as I still showed up steadily the last few weeks of classes to take the standardized test, I kept squeaking by from grade to grade. You see the similarity? Reading gave them this foundation to help them succeed in school. Anyone who thinks comic books are bad for you might look at the life of Bishop Desmond Tutu, okay? Nobel Peace Prize winner. People think comics leads you into lives of crime and violence. Look at this. Here's what he says. One of the things I'm most grateful to my father for is that contrary to educational principles, he allowed me to read comics. I think that's how I developed my love for English and for reading. Richard Wright is a famous American author, African-American author, wonderful writer. His best-known books, one of his best-known books, is his autobiography called Black Boy. And he describes how he grew up in a home in which reading was not encouraged. In fact, reading fiction was forbidden. His grandmother said you should only read true stories. A boarder lived at the home, a school teacher. She read stories to him. Grandma asked her to leave. He finally got access to books by borrowing a library card from a white friend of his and was able to take books out of a public library pretending it was for his friend. Here's how he describes his development as a writer. I wanted to write and did not even know the English language. I bought English grammars and found them dull. Got that? I felt I was getting a better sense of the language from novels than from grammars. I'd like to take just 2-3 minutes and fill in another case history. I want to tell you about me. And I'm going to tell you how I mastered academic prose, because you did it the same way. So let's compare notes. I had an advantage. I grew up middle class, and as my dad was the ultimate ethical capitalist. I was very proud of Dad. As I grew up, we had more and more, so I had all the support I needed, a very good print environment all the time. And I'm going to claim there are 3 stages in becoming a reader. Number 1, you hear stories. I did. Number 2, you engage in self-selected, narrow pleasure reading. You don't do it to become a better person. You don't do it to learn vocabulary and grammar. You do it because you like the books. In elementary school, it was comic books. Comic books, I still love comic books. By the way, I should tell you, in addition to my other honors, my black belt, and my books and my awards, I am also the #1 expert in the world in comic book research, because I am the only researcher in comic books, okay? So I win by default. We've done lots of papers on comic books. It's a wonderful thing to do. Comic books brought me to the level where I could start to read regular books. In later elementary school and beginning high school, it was sports stories. The sports stories were not just about the players. They were deep psychological studies of personalities and striving and failing. They were wonderful. After that, science fiction in high school. In those days, it was Robert Heinlein. It was Arthur C. Clarke. It was Isaac Asimov. It was Ray Bradbury. That was my curriculum. I read books in school that were assigned. I can't tell you about any of them. I've forgotten all of them. I remember every single one of these science fiction novels. And sometimes I pick them up again and read them. They're terrific. My son and I went through a Robert Heinlein period a few years ago where we started to reread all the Heinlein, okay? The early Heinlein is terrific, okay? My high school experience, very similar to what Alfie Kohn says. Alfie Kohn says, in high school, I paid attention to everything except the teachers. That was pretty much me. This was my curriculum. Now, university was kind of like high school. In early university, it was bowling, playing pool, lifting weights, and playing the piano. That was about it at the university. Again, it was the private reading that I did. Graduate school, that was different. I discovered linguistics. I discovered the work of Noam Chomsky. When I started taking linguistics courses, I realized right away Chomsky was the one. You had to understand Chomsky. So I ignored a lot of the required reading because I didn't understand it. I started to read Chomsky complete works from the beginning. I started with syntactic structures, 1957, then a few other papers, then current issues in linguistic theory. Finally, I worked up to aspects of the theory of syntax. By the time I got there, it was completely transparent. If I tried to read that at the beginning, I understood nothing. For me, now this is for me, reading Chomsky was like reading science fiction, reading comic books, reading baseball stories. For me, it was riveting. I wanted to know what was going to happen next. I read it because I liked it and I was excited by it. I don't know Noam Chomsky. I met him once. My name and his name are usually connected when people talk about these things. I met him once. I said, "I'm Steve Krashen." He said, "Who?" Okay. But Chomsky was my teacher. From Chomsky, I learned how to write like an academic, and I learned academic thinking. I read the books not because I wanted to get academic style. I read it because of the content. My acquisition of academic language was a byproduct. That's how it works. It's a result, not a cause. Later on in graduate school, I got interested in left-right brain research. That's what everybody did in those days. So I read the complete works of a woman named Doreen Kimura, one of the top researchers in this area. I read all her work from 1957 to the present. Each paper, each one paper by her colleagues. It was riveting. It was like reading fiction. Again, it was a wonderful story. From her, I realized later, I learned how to write experiments. I learned how to do statistical analyses and how to apply statistics and what the formula. I didn't intend to do that. Once again, it was a byproduct. So once again, I say there are 3 stages, but they have things in common. You hear stories, you get interested in books. Then you do your own self-selected, narrow pleasure reading, what you want to read. Then that brings you to the point where you can start to understand difficult academic language, and you do the same thing. In every stage, it's narrow. In every stage, it's self-selected. In the interest of time, I'm going to go to the last page and talk about the biggest factor in encouraging reading. The biggest factor in encouraging reading is providing access to books, rarely discussed. And for many, many children, the only place they're going to find books is the library, especially children of poverty. That's it. That comes first. We know a lot about libraries. When people ask me, what's the most exciting thing in your research? Libraries, of course. I'm obsessed with libraries. I'll tell you a few things about libraries. Number 1, children use libraries. If you ask a child, where did you get the book you're now reading? Anywhere from 33% to 90% will mention some library. Depends on the study, but they're used quite a bit. In the United States, the #1 researcher in libraries is a man named Keith Curry Lance, L-A-N-C-E. Your homework assignment is to Google Keith Curry Lance, who has been a hero of libraries in the United States. He and his teams have gone into different states like California, Oregon, Texas, and they look at the quality of libraries, and they always find the better the library, the higher the reading scores, even when you control for all the factors possible. I got involved in this about the time Lance did, and our most current study, which is on the back page, where it says Pearl's result, I think this study is the most important study I have ever been connected with. My colleagues, Sean Lee from Taiwan and Jeff McQuillan from California, both of them were my students in the 1990s, but we're still hanging together doing this research. We have a very close, personal, virtual relationship on research. We looked at the Pearl's results. As some of you know, Pearl's gets in the news every so often. It's a test given to, in this case, 10-year-olds in countries around the world. reading comprehension, and with statistical magic, they make sure that the tests are of reasonably equal difficulty. When the results are announced, the newspapers get very excited about who won. You know, Germany wants to know if they beat Italy. France wants to know if they beat Japan. Korea wants to know if they beat Taiwan. Again, Alfie Kohn, he says, the results should be reported in the sports section of the newspaper. Okay, it's like that. We didn't look at that. We looked at the factors. We got all their data. We did several analyses on this, and I'm going to give you our simplest analysis, which I think is very accurate. This is, again, multiple regression. You're now experts in multiple regression, right? Because we did this before. If you look at the chart on page 25, you will see one predictor was SES. That means socioeconomic status, wealth. Powerful predictor. The beta 0.41, by far the highest, easily statistically significant. We have found this in every study ever done. In fact, sometimes poverty is so powerful a predictor, there's nothing left for anything else. It wipes out everything. The Pearls people also did a survey of how much independent reading was done in each country. So this is the percentage of children in each country, percentage of 10-year-olds, who had a chance to do sustained silent reading or something similar. As you see, it makes a modest contribution, not quite statistically significant, but something is probably going on there. The next one, library. Access to a library of at least 500 books. Look at the beta. Nearly as high as the effect of poverty. In this study, a good library nearly balances the effect of poverty. This makes sense. Children of poverty have no access to books. They don't have books at home. They don't have libraries where they live. Okay? They don't have bookstores in their neighborhood. Studies have shown this. And very often their schools have inferior libraries. You supply books, things get better. Look at the next one, instruction. The more instruction, the worse. My prediction is that if you did a graph, you would probably find from zero instruction to a little bit, things get better. But after that, diminishing returns. I know you're wondering what R squared means, very important. R squared 0.61, this means with these four predictors, we explained about 60% of what's going on. I've recently been trying to do replication, and you are the first group to hear these results. They are unpublished. Wow, okay. I hope my biographers are here to see this. Okay. This is the same thing. This is the Pearls done a few years ago. And as you see, once again, poverty is the monster. Dominates everything. This time they had access to libraries of 5,000 books. Not quite as strong as the first study, but it counts. It made an impact. It's about 1/3 as strong as the effect of poverty. So it does make a contribution. It does soften the impact of poverty. None of the others survive in the multiple regression. Some of them show good correlations with the Pearl scores, but when you do a controlled study, they disappear. Let's go through them. Classroom library, maybe something's going on. Does your parent read to you? Or is your parent a reader? I'm sorry, parental reading. Everyone thinks that's important. We have to make the parents read. It turns out that is nearly entirely a result of social class. Once you put social class in the equation, parental reading doesn't matter. Early literacy, this is my favorite. This was the question. They asked parents, when your child came to school, could your child do basic elementary decoding? Could your child write simple words? Could your child do a little spelling? Did your child know basic phonics and a little spelling? The correlation between reading and age 10, reading at age 10 and early literacy is consistently negative. My suspicion, people say, oh, get these kids when they're young, teach them the alphabet, give them basic phonics. I think it's bogus literacy. This is also substantiated by the UK study. We found reading proficiency at age 5 was not a predictor. And all the studies of the impact of phonics, which tell us that heavy phonics programs only help you on tests where you where you pronounce lists of words in isolation. They make no contribution to reading comprehension. Finally, once again, instruction was a big disappointment. In this case, negative but insignificant. The big winner, again and again, libraries. Let me conclude by restating my opening sentence, because I've gone way over time. It's reading that counts. At a time when we have this enormous evidence for the benefits of reading coming to us from research all over the world, and growing evidence on the power of libraries, our governments are doing exactly the opposite. Libraries are being defunded. Community libraries are being defunded. School libraries are being unfunded. The money is going into technology, for which there is no clear evidence, and the money is going into testing, for which there is no clear evidence. We seem to be more interested in weighing the pig rather than feeding it. So it's important, I think, to get this kind of data around. Thank you very much.